Yep, that's my collarbone. Bet you're wondering how I got like that. Well, that's a story from another adventure. For now, let's focus on the adventure at hand, which is driving from Colorado and down the Baja to begin our bike trip. Going back to last fall, I asked my work for 4 months off so that I could hike the Pacific Crest Trail, and surprisingly enough, they accepted my PTO request. In the meantime, thanks to some other YouTubers, I got interested in bike packing, and I joked around at work that if I got injured where I couldn't thru hike, I'd switch to bike packing instead. As you guys can tell, I got injured, so while I was having surgery and recovering, I convinced my buddy Luke to get a bike and go on this trip with me. Here you can see we're getting his bike ready, and later on in the video I'll have pictures of both of our full setups laid out on the floor. While I really geek out on the gear, there's a whole lot more that goes into these trips than just the gear. I had to get a lot of my life stuff together, like getting my truck ready for the drive and selling the tires for a little bit of extra cash. I didn't get any farewell videos or any footage of us loading up the taco, but we left after Mother's Day and stopped at a few buddies' places along the way. Because you know, once you're on a road trip, everything's along the way. Stopped at one buddy's in Salt Lake, and then here we stopped at my buddy Byron's place in Phoenix, and I even helped him work on his bike. After breaking up the drive, Luke and I finally made it to California and spent a week on the boat while we got all of our gear ready. Here are both of our setups spread out on the floor. Let me know if you guys want a full breakdown on this. My gear ended up being 90% of the stuff I was going to use for the Pacific Crest Trail, but I wanted to test it all for bike packing before I made any real recommendations. This is where the logistics start to get a little trickier as we switch out my taco for Mark's Nissan. Mark is the guy whose boat we were staying on, and while I needed somewhere to store my truck for 4 months while I'd be gone, Mark also needed a way of getting his truck down the Baja so that he could use it for putzing around on land when he wasn't on the boat. My brother also has a Nissan hardbody, and I can't think of a more perfect truck from Mexico. Here, we're swapping out the radio, mostly so we can charge our phone since the cigarette lighter doesn't work, but it wouldn't be a hardbody without that $25 Walmart radio swap. Once we got the truck ready, we went and grabbed all of our gear to load it up. Can't forget the important stuff.
We should do this all the way through Mexico.
We hit the gas station early Monday morning and headed to the border, hoping this wouldn't be the last time this old girl saw American soil. Luke and I opted for the Tecate border crossing rather than Tijuana because we'd heard better things, and boy were they right. They waved us right through the border, and we were able to head around the block and go right back up to the immigration office to get our permits for being in the country for 180 days. We were out of there in no time. I may have been a little overly confident in my driving abilities, but that changed quickly once you see the roads and the other drivers down there. It was a relief to get off the highway, but that changed quickly when we realized the last 30 miles of our trip were going to take 2.5 hours. Not to gatekeep, but we were heading to a secret windsurfing spot to meet up with our other buddy Clint. Quick travel tip we learned from Clint: if you're going to be on these roads for an extended period of time, air down your tires for a way softer ride. That being said, gotta make sure you have an air compressor so you can air them back up afterwards. Clint wasn't kidding when he said this was one of the best windsurfing spots in the world. It was windy. Luckily, he let us crash his camping setup and put our tent behind his van to block the wind. We ended up staying for a couple days, and while it was frustrating not being able to get in the water with him, watching Clint on the foil all day sure was entertaining. I'm just kidding. Clint was actually really good and could just keep lapping for hours and hours. Foiling sure is a crazy sport. It was awesome to sit around the fire at night with all the other people who've been coming here since the 80s and hear their crazy stories. Unfortunately, we finally had to head out, and our next stop was the Bay of Los Angeles.
Dive in.
It was a pretty sweet camping spot, and we even had a little visitor. We may or may not have gotten stuck in the sand leaving the beach that morning. Remember that travel tip I said about airing down your tires? Well, it works for getting unstuck too. Here I am airing the tires back up at a gas station with the pump we brought. Our next camping spot was another secret spot too. Sorry, but after our run-in with the sand, we didn't want to risk it on this beach, and Luke and I ended up hiking in. It was well worth the hike, and unfortunately, the only footage I have of our actual camping setup is this atrocious Snapchat video that luckily my mom saved. Thanks, Mom. After that, we made it to the southern half of the Baja, and just look at how bad these roads are. Poor Nissan was getting rattled to death. It took a little bit of navigational skill, but we made it to our next stop, Mulahay.
Like the looking. Yeah. Oh yeah. Money.
I'm just kidding. This is one of the more popular spots in the Baja, and we just used the iOverlander app to find this free camping spot.
Close enough to tell? Yeah.
I noticed along the way that we picked up a little friend. We went straight from removing dead birds from our grill to prepping our food for the bike trip. This is a personal favorite, peanut butter and honey, and putting the honey in the peanut butter jar saves you on containers and the risk of getting sticky honey all over your gear.
What? Oh, it was just squirting sideways.
What?
It was kind of not coming out straight down.
Alright, you can stop. Oh, nice.
Bon appetit, mother truckers.
It was in Mulahay that Luke and I decided to double check some of the mileage for our upcoming biking trip, and it's a good thing we did because we realized we would have been behind schedule. So we headed straight past the Bay of Conception all the way to La Paz. Unfortunately, in the rush, I didn't get any footage of us dropping off the truck at a storage unit, but Luke and I stayed one night at a hostel in La Paz and then hopped on the ferry the very next day. After reading a bunch of confusing information online, Luke and I just decided to head straight to the dock and figure it out ourselves. It ended up being pretty easy and not as confusing as everybody made it seem. It almost seemed too easy, and Luke and I were starting to get a little nervous as it started to get closer to the departure time, but they just saved the best for last and ushered us right on. We stuck our bikes in the corner and headed up to the top deck to realize what we'd gotten ourselves into. I grabbed my sleeping pad and actually got a great night's sleep up here, but Luke stayed down below and watched action movies at full volume with all the other truck drivers. We unloaded in Mazatlan and enjoyed one last night on the beach before the real adventure began.